Monday, the 14th of April. Welcome to the President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. All right, let's get briefed. We'll start things off with a shift in the U.S.-China trade war. Now, the White House is exempting smartphones and other key electronics from its new round of tariffs, hoping to spare American consumers and tech companies. I'll have the latest details on that. Later in the show, American and Iranian officials just held their first face-to-face talks in years. Well, sort of face-to-face. With the exception of a brief direct conversation, the bulk of the discussion was held indirectly using Omani mediators. The White House is calling the meeting, quote, constructive, with more negotiations on the way. Plus, the Trump administration has revealed its plan to acquire Greenland. They're not giving up on that. It doesn't include a military option, but the U.S. may be ready to spend big to make the Arctic island American. Now, given inflation, I suspect that Greenland is going to cost a lot more than what the U.S. spent on either Manhattan or the Louisiana Purchase back in the day. And in today's Back of the Brief, we head to the U.S. southern border, where President Trump has given the Pentagon new authority over federal land to expand immigration enforcement efforts. But first, today's PDB Spotlight. There may be a slight thaw in the trade war between the U.S. and China, at least for now. In a surprise move late Friday night, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection published a new list of exemptions to President Trump's sweeping tariff policy. Among the products now spared from steep import taxes would be smartphones, hard drives, processors, solar cells, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, flat panel displays, and memory chips. The change appears to exempt these goods from both that baseline 10% tariff that applies to most countries and, more importantly, from the massive 145% China-specific tariff that just went into effect. In other words, well, the tech sector just got a massive lifeline. The reversal is especially welcome news, of course, for America's tech giants, who remain heavily reliant on China for both labor and components. While politicians across the spectrum have called for what they refer to as decoupling from China for decades now, the country still plays an essential role, of course, in producing and assembling American tech, both because of its massive manufacturing capacity and its intricate web of suppliers. Now, if you want a clear example of this, we take a look at Apple. Although its devices are designed in California, nearly all iPhones, iPads, and MacBooks are assembled in China by Foxconn, which employs hundreds of thousands of workers across sprawling industrial parks. Those factories rely on nearby Chinese companies to supply key components like glass screens, batteries, and camera modules before final assembly. Any disruption, be it from tariffs or political tensions, could send shockwaves through Apple's global supply chain. And the costs add up fast. According to the Wall Street Journal, producing an iPhone Pro in China costs Apple about $550. But with tariffs in place, that number would jump to $820. That's an increase that would almost certainly be passed on to American consumers, with prices for the new iPhone potentially pushing $2,000. That kind of sticker shock could have crippled demand and sent ripple effects across the entire consumer electronics sector. So it might be time to break out that old flip phone from the 1980s. Oh, they were good devices. And thank God I held on to my beeper. It's not just Apple. In total, China accounts for nearly 25% of all electronic goods imported into the U.S. That's according to the U.S. International Trade Commission. Whether we like it or not, the American tech economy still flows through Chinese factories. Of course, China is retaliating, too. On Friday, Beijing raised its tariffs on U.S. imports to 125%. But notably, it also announced that it had no intention of increasing those duties any further. That, along with the White House's exemptions, suggests that both sides may be seeking to cool things down. Now, the U.S. isn't as dependent on exports to China, of course, as China is on exports to the U.S., but the impact will still be significant. China remains the third largest buyer of American goods, behind only Canada and Mexico, purchasing nearly $150 billion in U.S. exports last year. That includes critical sectors like agriculture and aviation, soybeans, pork, beef, aircraft parts. If the trade war drags on, industries already operating on thin margins, especially in the Midwest and Pacific Northwest, could feel the pain rather quickly. For now, the latest moves may give the tech industry some breathing room. But, as of now, the broader trade relationship, well, that remains uncertain. All right, coming up next, America holds direct talks, well, sort of, with Iran for the first time in years. And the Trump administration lays out its plan to acquire Greenland. I'll be right back. Hey, Mike Baker here. Well, it's grilling season. Oh, that's a good thing. And I'm about to tell you where to get the finest beef to throw on your grill. It's a classic American business, generations of family raising high-quality beef in the great state of Texas. Now, of course, I'm talking about Tri-Tails beef. This isn't some corporate meat factory, not some mass-produced operation by a faceless corporation. Tri-Tails is a fifth-generation Texas ranch where cattle are pasture-raised, grain-finished, and raised the right way. They handle the beef on site and ship it straight to your door. No middlemen, no mystery. All their beef is sourced to match the genetics and care that they've built their herd on, ensuring consistent marbling, tenderness, and rich flavor in every cut. As we say, small batch, big flavor. You can taste the difference the moment it hits the grill. Now, whether it's a ribeye, a filet, or a New York strip, it's the kind of beef that brings people together. USDA prime and choice, hand-packed, and ready for your table. And right now, they've got a special offer just for PDB listeners. Go to trybeef.com/PDB and get 2 free flat iron steaks with your first box over $250. That's trybeef.com/PDB. Support real ranchers and eat like you mean it. Welcome back to the PDB. The U.S. and Iran held their highest-level official discussions in years on Saturday, launching indirect nuclear talks in Oman amid rising tensions over the Iranian regime's accelerating uranium enrichment program. The meeting, held at a fortified compound on the outskirts of Muscat, was brokered by Omani Foreign Minister Saeed Badr, who shuttled messages between the two sides for just over 2 hours. While Tehran initially rebuffed the idea of face-to-face contact, the talks ultimately yielded a brief, direct exchange between Special Envoy Stephen Witkoff and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, the first such meeting since President Trump returned to office. The White House later described the discussions as, quote, very positive and constructive. Iranian state media confirmed the short, direct exchange, with Araghchi signaling openness to a follow-up session focused on establishing a general framework for a new nuclear accord. He told Iranian state media, quote, we're seeking an agreement as quickly as possible, though reaching a deal will not be easy, end quote. Speaking aboard Air Force One, President Trump struck a cautiously optimistic tone, telling reporters, quote, I think the talks are going okay. Nothing matters until you get it done, end quote. Sources familiar with the negotiations say Iran is pressing for rapid sanctions relief, access to billions in frozen assets abroad, and an end to U.S. pressure targeting oil exports to China. In return, Tehran has proposed rolling back uranium enrichment to the 3.67% cap that was set under the 2015 nuclear deal, which Trump left in 2018. But there's a long road between intent and execution. As of now, the Iranian regime is enriching uranium to 60% purity, just short of the 90% threshold needed for a nuclear weapon, and they've stockpiled more than 18,000 pounds of enriched material. That's according to the International Atomic Energy Agency. While U.S. intelligence officials say that the mullahs have not yet taken steps to weaponize the material, they warn that it is approaching breakout capability. Iran continues to insist its program is for peaceful purposes and drew red lines during the talks, rejecting dismantlement, reaffirming its right to enrich, and opposing any inspections beyond the scope of existing IAEA protocols. Well, so, not really offering any meaningful concessions. It seems like they're taking a page out of Vladimir Putin's negotiating playbook. On the American side, Witkoff reiterated the Trump administration's bottom line. Iran must not be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. Former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo underscored that message on Fox News, saying no agreement is possible unless the Iranian regime entirely abandons its nuclear ambitions. Analysts say the opening for diplomacy is likely a byproduct of mounting U.S. military pressure. Rebecca Grant, a senior fellow at the Lexington Institute American think tank, stated, quote, all the options are not only on the table, they're all deployed to the Middle East. She's referring to what we've been tracking here on the PDB regarding the March deployment of B-2 stealth bombers to Diego Garcia, a joint UK-U.S. military base in the Indian Ocean, and the deployment of 2 carrier groups. She added, quote, Iran either has to talk or get their nuclear facilities bombed, end quote. Retired General Jack Keane offered a similar assessment, telling Fox News, quote, they've come to the conclusion that the president is dead serious about supporting an Israeli-led U.S.-backed strike on Iran to take down their nuclear enterprise. That posture aligns with Prime Minister Netanyahu's Oval Office meeting with Trump last week, where he reiterated support for a Libya-style disarmament model, one that would require Iran to surrender its nuclear infrastructure entirely. The next round of talks is scheduled for 19 April, again in Oman. However, inspection protocols remain a sticking point. U.S. officials say any deal must include extensive inspections to ensure that Iran cannot restart its weapons program under the radar. And as we've discussed here on the PDB in the past, the old 2015 agreement failed to provide for full verification, as the Iranians were allowed to keep certain key facilities, off of the inspection list. Okay, turning stateside. President Trump's long-standing ambition to acquire Greenland from Denmark has shifted from rhetorical flair to official policy, as the White House begins orchestrating a campaign to bring the world's largest island under American control. At the center of the strategy is a sweeping public relations push aimed squarely at Greenland's population of some 57,000, many of whom are Inuit with deep ancestral ties to Alaska's indigenous communities. As part of that messaging operation, the administration is leaning hard on cultural kinship and economic promises. According to officials familiar with the plan, the U.S. intends to portray its stewardship as a gateway to prosperity, modern infrastructure, and protection from foreign adversaries. Social media campaigns and targeted advertising are expected to play a key role. Internal White House discussions have floated the idea of linking Greenland's future to Alaska's economic model, where residents receive yearly dividend checks from oil revenues. The underlying pitch, align with the U.S. and you'll get paid. Currently, Denmark provides Greenland with roughly $600 million in subsidies. Under U.S. governance, that figure could rise dramatically. One estimate circulated in the West Wing suggests the U.S. might offer as much as $10,000 per person annually. The administration argues that this investment would be recouped through access to Greenland's vast and largely untapped natural resources, including rare earth minerals, uranium, and oil spread across its 836,000 square mile expanse. For reference, that's an area equivalent to approximately 22% of the U.S. Still, there's a high degree of skepticism, both in Greenland and in the U.S. In Greenland's most recent election, an independence-leaning party favoring closer ties with the U.S. won just 25% of the vote, suggesting that while interest in alternatives to Danish rule exists, widespread support remains elusive. As we've discussed here on the PDB, Vice President J.D. Vance and National Security Advisor Mike Waltz have already traveled to Greenland to pitch the vision in person, laying the groundwork for what President Trump envisions as a peaceful annexation via Greenlandic self-determination. Now, Danish officials, however, are not buying it. The Danish Prime Minister has publicly slammed the effort as coercive and dangerous, bluntly stating, quote, "You cannot annex another country," end quote. Well, somebody should tell that to Vladimir Putin. While the White House insists its approach is democratic and voluntary, Trump's repeated assertions that the U.S. will gain control, quote, "one way or another," has obviously unsettled Copenhagen. All right, coming up next in the back of the brief, President Trump gives the Pentagon control of key federal lands along the U.S. southern border, expanding the military's role in immigration enforcement. We'll have those details next. Hey, Mike Baker here. Well, The tariffs and the trade wars have thrown the global economy into chaos. I think that's fair to say. Potential widespread inflation tied to massive supply chain disruptions is weighing heavily, frankly, on all of us. But there's a silver lining that I think most people missed. And actually, it's a silver and gold lining. President Trump specifically exempted gold and silver bullion from these sweeping tariffs. And while these new policies are triggering significant financial chaos, well, the administration preserved your ability to diversify into precious metals. So if you're concerned about your savings, I encourage you to have a free consultation with a Birch Gold precious metals specialist. Look, the first step is to text PDB to 989-898 and receive your free, no-obligation information kit on gold. Learn how to hold gold and silver in a tax-sheltered account. Birch Gold will help you convert an existing IRA or a 401k into a gold IRA for no money out of your pocket. Find out why so many Americans trust Birch Gold Group to help protect their savings with gold. With an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of thankful customers, all you got to do is simple. Text PDB to the number 989-898. Again, text PDB to 989-898 to claim your free information kit right now. In today's Back of the Brief, President Trump expanded the military's authority along the U.S. southern border, signing a presidential memorandum that transfers jurisdiction over a stretch of federally owned land to the Defense Department to enhance border security operations. The order, released Friday evening, grants the Pentagon control over what's known as the Roosevelt Reservation. That's a 60-foot wide corridor of federal land that cuts through California, Arizona, and New Mexico. Now, it's important to point out that American Indian reservations remain exempt from the order, not included in this order. Trump wrote in the memo, quote, "Our southern border is under attack from a variety of threats," adding, quote, "The complexity of the current situation requires that our military take a more direct role in securing our southern border than in the recent past," end quote. The move effectively clears the path for the military to take the lead on a series of enforcement and infrastructure efforts, potentially including expanded barriers, heightened surveillance operations, and advanced detection systems. According to defense officials, the Pentagon is expected to evaluate the initial phase of operations, including staffing requirements, within the first 45 days. Though the memorandum stops short of explicitly authorizing detention centers, senior administration officials confirm that the Roosevelt Reservation is being actively considered as a staging ground for temporarily holding migrants who enter the U.S. illegally. With the federal detention system nearing capacity, the administration views the site as a critical pressure valve in its broader effort to streamline deportations. Officials warn that ongoing bottlenecks in migrant processing risk undermining the White House's mass deportation strategy. Since his first day back in office, Trump wasted no time declaring a national emergency at the southern border, mobilizing active duty troops alongside Texas National Guard units and state law enforcement under a separate disaster declaration. That military presence has since become a cornerstone of the administration's border strategy. The new order comes as unauthorized border crossings have dropped to their lowest levels in years. After a prolonged surge during the Biden era, the numbers sharply declined in early 2025, lower than during Trump's first administration. Now, the White House attributes this outcome to a combination of stricter enforcement policies, accelerated deportations, and a vastly expanded federal presence on the ground. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Monday, the 14th of April. If you have any questions or comments, and I hope you do, please reach out to me at pdb@thefirsttv.com. And hopefully you had a chance to catch the latest episode of the PDB Situation Report over the weekend. If not, well, there's no need to stress. You can catch it and past episodes on our YouTube channel. You can find that at President's Daily Brief, and of course on all podcast platforms. Our terrific guests this past weekend included Gordon Chang and George Barros, talking all things China, Russia, and Ukraine. And, of course, we went through my famous tips on making fancy Easter Sunday table centerpieces out of classified documents. You don't want to miss that. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool. Hey, thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video,
don't forget to hit that like button and leave a comment, a really positive, nice, and kind comment. That would be appreciated. And if you're not already subscribed to our channel, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our daily updates.